Victor Dane stood frozen in his penthouse office, staring at the divorce papers scattered across his mahogany desk like fragments of a life he never saw crumbling. The morning had begun like any other in Victor Dane's meticulously orchestrated world. His assistant had already arranged his meetings, his driver waited downstairs, and his publicist had briefed him on the day's talking points for the tech summit. At 50, Victor commanded a tech empire worth $12 billion, his name synonymous with innovation and ruthless efficiency. The corner office of Dane Industries offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, a kingdom he had conquered through sheer determination and calculated risks. But the envelope waiting on his desk changed everything. His hands trembled a sensation foreign to the man who had stared down hostile takeovers and congressional hearings without flinching. The divorce papers were pristine, professional, clinical in their finality. But it was Chloe's handwritten letter that shattered his composure. "I waited for you to come home, but I finally realized I've already left." Victor's mind raced backward through the years, searching for signs he had missed. Chloe had been his anchor during the company's tumultuous early days, working 16-hour shifts alongside him in their tiny Brooklyn apartment, surviving on takeout and shared dreams. She had been a promising journalist then, sharp and ambitious, but she had set aside her career when Dane Industries demanded everything from both of them. When had she stopped asking about his day? When had their conversations reduced to logistics about charity galas and board dinners? He couldn't remember the last time they had shared breakfast without him checking his phone, or when they had taken a vacation that wasn't interrupted by emergency calls from investors. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built an empire on understanding market patterns and predicting consumer behavior, yet he had completely failed to read the woman who shared his bed for 15 years. Chloe had always been there, perfectly dressed in designer gowns, smiling gracefully beside him at public events, playing the role of the supportive CEO's wife with practiced elegance. But now, reading her words, he realized that somewhere along the way, the woman he had fallen in love with had become a stranger living in his shadow. She had transformed from partner to accessory, and he had been too consumed by quarterly reports and expansion strategies to notice her slow disappearance. The letter continued with devastating clarity. "You built a fortune on the premise that innovation requires constant evolution, but our marriage became a museum piece, beautiful, untouched, and slowly gathering dust. I refuse to be preserved in amber while life happens around me." Victor's phone buzzed with urgent messages from his board of directors, but for the first time in decades, he ignored them. The man who prided himself on controlling every variable in his professional life had just discovered that his personal world had been slipping away, one silent evening at a time. Chloe Dane had perfected the art of invisible rebellion to the outside world. She remained the enviable wife of a tech billionaire, her Instagram filled with carefully curated glimpses of charity luncheons, art gallery openings, and exotic vacations that Victor attended in body but never in spirit. But beneath the polished surface, she had been quietly reclaiming pieces of herself that she thought were lost forever. It had started 18 months ago with a creative writing class at a small community center in Greenwich Village, far from the glittering social circles of the Upper East Side. Using the pen name C.M. Rivers, she had poured her accumulated loneliness onto paper, crafting essays about emotional isolation in gilded cages. The other students, aspiring writers, retired teachers, young dreamers, knew nothing of her real identity. To them, she was simply Chloe, a woman rediscovering her voice after years of silence. The writing became her sanctuary. While Victor conquered markets across 3 continents, Chloe explored the geography of her own neglected dreams. She began taking solo trips, telling Victor they were spa retreats or visits to old college friends. Instead, she wandered through European cities with nothing but a backpack and a notebook, writing in cafes where no one recognized her face or expected her to smile on command. Her essays, initially shared only with her writing group, began appearing in small literary magazines. The pieces were raw, honest explorations of what happened when love became routine, when partnership devolved into parallel lives that never intersected. One piece, titled "The Vanishing Point," described a woman who realized she had become invisible in her own marriage. He could map every emerging market in Southeast Asia, but couldn't tell you the color of my eyes when I cried. The more she wrote, the clearer her path became. Chloe wasn't angry. Anger required emotional investment that Victor had long since forfeited. She felt something far more dangerous: indifference. The man who once stayed up all night discussing their shared future now felt like a distant colleague with whom she happened to share living space. She had tried, initially, to bridge the growing chasm between them. She had planned intimate dinners that were interrupted by business calls, suggested weekends away that were postponed for critical meetings, and attempted conversations about their relationship that were met with distracted nods and promises to discuss it later that never came. The final revelation had come during their last public appearance together, a gala for pediatric cancer research, where Victor gave an impassioned speech about the importance of investing in what matters most. As he spoke about family and legacy, Chloe realized that he genuinely believed his own words, even as he lived the complete opposite. He had become so skilled at compartmentalizing that he could deliver heartfelt speeches about priorities while ignoring his wife's growing distance. That night, as Victor celebrated another successful fundraising effort, Chloe made her decision. She contacted a discreet divorce attorney, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. She deserved more than being a beautiful statue in Victor's perfectly curated life. Victor's first instinct was damage control, the same methodical approach he used for corporate crises. He called his lawyers, his publicist, even his mother, as if Chloe's departure was a hostile takeover that could be managed with the right strategy and sufficient resources. But every phone call only deepened his confusion. This wasn't a negotiation or a power play. It was the quiet revolution of a woman who had already moved beyond his reach. His assistant, Margaret, who had worked for him for 8 years, delivered the most brutal truth of all. When Victor demanded to know how he could have missed the signs, she looked at him with barely concealed pity. "Mr. Dane, Mrs. Dane stopped asking me to hold your dinner reservations 6 months ago. She stopped requesting your schedule 3 months ago. And last month, she stopped wearing her wedding ring to public events. We all noticed. We assumed you knew." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His own staff had been witnessing his marriage's dissolution while he remained obliviously focused on quarterly projections and market expansion. He was a man who prided himself on attention to detail, yet he had failed to observe the most important details of his own life. Victor began what he later recognized as the most desperate campaign of his career, not to save a company or secure an investment, but to win back a woman who had already grieved the end of their marriage in private. He sent elaborate flower arrangements to their penthouse, each more extravagant than the last. He cleared his schedule for an entire week, something he hadn't done since their honeymoon 15 years earlier. He even canceled a crucial meeting with Japanese investors, a decision that sent shockwaves through his executive team. But Chloe had moved out of the penthouse and into a modest apartment in Soho, a space that reflected the woman she was becoming rather than the role she had been playing. When Victor finally tracked down her new address through his security team, a violation of privacy that would later feature prominently in her memoir, she received him with the same polite distance she might show a business acquaintance. "You look tired," she said simply, offering him coffee in a kitchen that was 1/10 the size of their former one, but somehow felt more alive. Victor launched into a prepared speech about second chances and renewed priorities, but Chloe's expression remained unchanged. She had heard these promises before, during previous periods when his guilt temporarily outweighed his ambition. But this time, something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't waiting for him to change. She had already changed herself. "Victor," she said gently, "I'm not angry with you. I understand why you became who you are. The pressure, the responsibility, the weight of other people's livelihoods depending on your decisions. But understanding doesn't mean I have to accept being collateral damage in your success story." Her words were devastating precisely because they weren't accusatory. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had already processed her grief and emerged on the other side. Victor realized, with growing horror, that he wasn't fighting to save his Marriage. He was mourning a relationship that had already ended, piece by piece, while he was too distracted to notice. The media storm began 3 weeks after the divorce papers were filed, when an investigative journalist at New York Magazine connected C.M. Rivers to Chloe Dane. The revelation transformed her anonymous essays into a cultural phenomenon overnight. Her piece titled "The Vanishing Point" went viral, shared by thousands of women who recognized their own experiences in her words. Victor watched from his office as his private life became public spectacle. The irony was crushing. He had spent years cultivating his public image as a visionary leader and devoted family man, only to have that facade demolished by his wife's honest account of their marriage's slow death. But what surprised him most was that Chloe's writing wasn't vindictive or bitter. Instead, it was achingly sad, a meditation on how two people could live side by side yet grow completely apart. The essay that haunted him most was titled "The Geography of Loneliness." I learned to navigate the topography of silence in our home. The kitchen island where we ate breakfast without speaking. The hallway where we passed each other like polite strangers. The bedroom where we slept on opposite sides, careful not to disturb the invisible boundary that had grown between us. I became an expert cartographer of emotional distance, mapping territories I never wanted to explore. His investors began asking pointed questions about his stability and focus. Board members who had praised his leadership for years now whispered about his personal distractions. The stock price fluctuated with each new article about his marriage, a reminder that even billionaires couldn't completely insulate their professional lives from personal failures. But the most painful moment came when Victor's own daughter, Emma, called from her graduate program at Stanford. At 22, she possessed the sharp intelligence of both her parents and a brutal honesty that cut through his rationalizations. "Dad, I read Mom's essays," she said without preamble, "and honestly, I'm impressed she stayed as long as she did. I remember Christmas mornings when you were on conference calls with Hong Kong. I remember birthday dinners where you spent more time texting than talking to us. Mom protected me from seeing how lonely she was, but I wasn't blind." Emma's words shattered his last illusion that he had been a successful husband and father. While building his empire, his daughter continued with devastating precision, "The saddest part is that you genuinely love Mom, but you love her the way you love art, in a museum from a distance, appreciating the beauty without ever really engaging with it. She deserved better than being your beautiful, untouchable trophy." The conversation ended with Emma's promise to maintain a relationship with him, but also her clear statement that she supported her mother's decision completely. Victor found himself alone in his penthouse office, surrounded by awards and accolades that suddenly felt meaningless. He had conquered global markets, but lost the two most important people in his life through sheer neglect. For the first time in his adult life, Victor Dane, the man who had solutions for every business crisis, had no idea how to fix what he had broken. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Victor faced the most challenging board meeting of his career. Not because of financial troubles, Dane Industries remained profitable, despite the media scrutiny, but because he was fundamentally changed. The man who had once commanded rooms with unwavering confidence now questioned every decision, every priority, every assumption about what constituted success. Chloe's memoir, "The Man Who Built Empires But Forgot His Own Home," had become a bestseller, praised by critics for its nuanced exploration of modern marriage and the hidden costs of ambition. She had appeared on talk shows and given interviews, always speaking about Victor with a grace that somehow made her critique more devastating than anger would have been. "I don't want people to see Victor as a villain," she told one interviewer. "He's a man who genuinely believed that providing financial security was the same as providing emotional support. He measured love in stock options and vacation destinations, never understanding that what I needed was his presence, not his presence." The book's success had transformed Chloe from forgotten journalist to literary sensation. She had returned to the career she had abandoned, this time with a platform and a voice that resonated with millions of readers. Victor watched her interviews from his empty penthouse, proud of her success even as it highlighted his failures. The divorce settlement had been remarkably straightforward. Chloe had asked for only a modest percentage of his wealth, enough to ensure her independence. but far less than she could have claimed. She wanted no alimony, no ongoing financial entanglement. Her message was clear. She was choosing freedom over security, authenticity over comfort. Victor's relationships with other family members had also shifted dramatically. His mother, who had initially blamed Chloe for not trying harder, gradually came to understand the depth of emotional neglect her son had inflicted. His brother James, a teacher who had always been somewhat intimidated by Victor's success, now spoke to him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "You know what's tragic, Vic?" James had said during a rare dinner together. "You spent 20 years building a company culture based on innovation, collaboration, and employee satisfaction. You genuinely care about the people who work for you. But somehow, you never applied those same principles to your own family." The most painful realization was that Victor's neglect hadn't been intentional malice. It had been something worse, thoughtless assumption. He had simply assumed that Chloe would always be there, that marriage was a contract that required no maintenance once signed. He had treated their relationship like a blue-chip stock, something stable that could be ignored, while he focused on more volatile investments. Now, as he sat in his corner office overlooking the city he had conquered, Victor understood that he had won everything that didn't matter and lost everything that did. The view from his window remained spectacular, but he finally grasped what Chloe had been trying to tell him. Success without connection was just expensive loneliness. 2 years after the divorce, Victor Dane stood in the same corner office where he had first read Chloe's farewell letter. But the man reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows was profoundly different. The company had weathered the media storm and emerged stronger, partly because Victor's newfound humility had made him a more effective leader. He listened more, delegated better, and actually went home at reasonable hours, though home now felt more like a museum of his former life. Chloe had remarried 8 months ago to Marcus Chen, a documentary filmmaker she had met while researching her second book. Victor had learned about the wedding not from Chloe, they rarely spoke now, but from Emma, who served as maid of honor and posted photos that radiated genuine joy. In the pictures, Chloe looked luminous in a simple sundress, laughing in a way Victor couldn't remember seeing in years. Marcus gazed at her with the kind of present, focused attention that Victor now recognized he had never given his wife. The wedding had taken place in a small garden in Provence, attended by 50 close friends and family members. No media, no networking opportunities, no business contacts, just people who loved the couple for who they were, rather than what they could provide. It was everything Victor's own wedding hadn't been, despite costing a fraction of their elaborate Hampton ceremony 15 years earlier. Victor had sent a wedding gift, a small watercolor painting he remembered Chloe admiring in a gallery years ago, along with a note that simply read, "Wishing you the happiness you always deserved. Thank you for teaching me the difference between building an empire and building a life." Chloe had sent a brief thank you card in return, warm but formal, the kind of courtesy one might extend to a distant acquaintance. Emma visited him monthly now, their relationship slowly healing but forever changed. She was engaged to her graduate school boyfriend, planning a simple ceremony that Victor would attend as a guest rather than host. The dynamic shift was healthy but painful. He was learning to be a father rather than a CEO, to offer support rather than solutions. "Do you regret it?" Emma had asked during their last dinner together. "Building the company, I mean. Would you do it differently if you could start over?" Victor had considered the question carefully. "I regret how I built it," he finally answered. "Success doesn't have to cost what I paid for it. I chose to sacrifice everything else because I thought that made me strong. But real strength would have been figuring out how to succeed without destroying what mattered most." Now, as he prepared to step down as CEO, a decision that shocked Wall Street but felt inevitable to him, Victor reflected on the strange mathematics of his life. He had gained billions and lost the people who made wealth meaningful. He had conquered markets across 6 continents, but failed to navigate the geography of his own marriage. He had built an empire that would outlast him, but had forgotten to build relationships that could sustain him. The final irony was that Chloe's memoir had made her wealthy in her own right. Her speaking fees and book royalties had eliminated any financial dependence on him. completing her transformation from trophy wife to independent success story. She had used his neglect as raw material for art, turning their failed marriage into literature that helped thousands of other people understand their own relationships. Victor locked his office door for the last time, leaving behind the view that had once represented everything he wanted. As he walked toward the elevator, he wondered if redemption was possible for a man who had learned wisdom too late, to use it with the people who mattered most. Reflection question after reading Victor and Chloe's story. Consider this: in our modern world where professional success often demands total dedication, is it possible to build meaningful achievements without sacrificing deep personal relationships? Or are some people simply destined to choose between building empires and building connections? What would you have done differently if you were in Victor's position? And at what point does focusing on providing for your loved ones become a form of emotional abandonment?